Hello and welcome back to our next kindergarten through 8th grade general music PLC. I'm Ariel Robbins, your moderator for the year. In this topic, we'll be talking about instructional planning, both short term as in pacing within a single lesson, as well as long term in terms of units and year-long planning and even beyond that. In this first segment, we'll be talking about the elements of a lesson plan so that you have it all set and explained and ready to go before your students even walk in the door. So here we go. So the elements that I'm going to list here are elements that are suggested by the Georgia Department of Education. And in fact, I have a sample lesson plan template that I can share with you in the documents area on our PLC page group on the community. But they suggest listing your lesson plan, focus or goal or concept, like the main concept you're working on for that day, the standards that your lesson plan is hitting, and notice I'm mentioning more than one, plural, because in every single lesson we're probably going to be hitting more than one standard, the essential question and or I can statement. And this kind of comes down to an individual school preference. Certain vocabulary terms that you'll be teaching in the lesson, ways that you're going to differentiate the instruction for different types of learners that are going to come into your classroom, how you are going to assess how the students have grown within that class period, and of course, the procedure, the steps that you're going to take to teach them the concept of the day. So here is a sample lesson plan template that was created by the Georgia Department of Education. And you're going to notice there's a lot to this template. It's probably more than what you're already doing. I realize that different systems and different school buildings have different requirements for what go on your lesson plan. But if you are in a situation where you don't even know where to begin, this would be a good place to start. There may be some elements on here that your school or system does not require, and there may be some elements missing from this lesson plan that your school or system does require. So take all of that with a grain of salt. So up here, we've got what unit and what lesson plan number. We've got our general information up here. And interestingly, this lists the pacing, and this specific default is 2 45-minute classes. So I've seen different lesson plan templates where it's really more of an overall unit plan, and the pacing is kind of fluid on which step in the procedure each individual class ends on. That's one way to do it. My brain works on a week-to-week basis, so my lesson plans are usually one 45-minute class, and then the next lesson plan that I will create will kind of build on what we did before that. So here is a spot where you're going to put in the standards, and in a few minutes I'm going to show you a trick to make that much easier in your life. Here are some spots for assessment and what type of assessment you're going to be doing throughout the lesson. We're going to have a whole topic with our PLC about assessment, but these are some kind of things to think about. How are you going to kind of figure out where your students are coming from prior to beginning the lesson? This might be something that you did at the end of the class before, or it might be kind of tied into your warm-up for the day, but kind of to see where your students are as a whole group and individually if you're doing any sort of grouping later. How are you gauging their progress throughout the lesson? And as music teachers, most of the time this will be just like observation of performance or maybe some sort of discussion. And then how do you gauge whether they master that standard? And a lot of the times you can't gauge that after one lesson plan. So it might be that this doesn't go into every single lesson plan. And maybe at the end of the unit, you're seeing how they mastered all of the standards in that unit. So here's foundational information, like what they need to know beforehand, what concepts you're going to be covering, what are the main highlighted concepts, what are some new vocabulary terms for this lesson that you're going to be teaching, and then any links that you might be using in the lesson. And again, this is not required, but it's kind of nice to have it all in one place to kind of refer back to later. Then it also has a spot where you can specifically say, what are you going to do to increase the rigor for students who need an extra challenge, and how are you going to adapt the assignment for students who are requiring simplification. And this might be your special ed learners, or it might be students who excel at reading melody, but maybe don't know the Italian terms for expression. So it's a fluid situation of who might fit into these categories, which again, going back to your diagnostic assessment, that'll help you figure out which kids go into which category. This is also nice to write down ahead of time of what the students will need and what the teacher will need. If you write that ahead of time in the planning process, then when it's time to implement the plan, you'll have it ready to go and you'll have that list right there, and you'll just be able to pull out those materials. Then you have a spot for your essential questions, and I can show you how I post my essential questions for the class. I actually do an I can statement with my school. And now we get into the procedure. How are you going to introduce the concept? What are you going to do throughout the lesson? And how are you going to close out your lesson? So that's the Georgia Department of Education template. Now let me show you my template that I use in my everyday practice, and you'll notice it's a lot more simplified. So here's my weekly template. You can see I even name it weekly template. And if you're a Word user like I am, I have the autosave turned off. So this is just a template. And then as soon as I start adding things to it, I'll save it as a lesson plan. I usually do it by date. So, you know, I might title the lesson plan February 28th, 2022. And that's how it will be saved in my folders. So here is what I was referencing earlier for the standards, and I'm going to provide this to you also, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. I've created a drop-down menu of all the 5th grade standards, of all the 4th grade standards, that you can just copy and paste and drop them right into your lesson plan. So here are all of the standards for 5th grade music in Georgia. And you notice that I have 5 of them listed as a default in each lesson plan. Here are the 4th grade standards, so it's customized to each grade. I also have it as one long document, so I can kind of print it out and have it all in one spot and save it as one long document. But sometimes I might be teaching or hitting on 3 standards or 5 standards or 7 standards. So this is customizable. If I wanted to add more, I can just copy the drop down and paste it as another item. Or if I needed fewer, I can just hit the delete button. But that makes it so I don't have to look up the standards and I don't have to copy them every single time. Here I have my I can statement. I have how I'm assessing them. I also added a moment for creative opportunity because I noticed that I was kind of really in my own head about the procedure. And for a couple of years there, I was not, especially during COVID, where I couldn't give manipulatives to students. I was not giving them a lot of time to create their own things. And so this year I really brought that back as a separate line item in my lesson plan. How are they creating? Are they improvising on the xylophones? Are they arranging rhythm cards into their own original rhythm? So I always try to incorporate at least some sort of creative opportunity into every single lesson. And by putting it on my lesson plan, nobody asked for that except for myself. It kind of helps remind me that I need to do it with my students. So here are those drop downs I was telling you about. Here are the kindergarten drop downs. Here are the 1st grade drop downs. And again, this is all of the 1st grade standards that are listed on the georgiastandards.org, which I'll also show you in a second. And so when you get this document, again, you can just take the 3rd grade standards, copy it, and paste it as many times as your heart contents into your lesson plan. And then that should make life a lot easier for you guys, hopefully. And then hopefully you know this, but just in case you don't, to find the General Music Standards of Excellence for the state of Georgia, you're going to go to georgiastandards.org, and then you're going to go to Georgia Standards of Excellence. And as we discussed before, music is under the Fine Arts umbrella. So if you scroll over to Fine Arts and find music, then you can find the Georgia Standards of Excellence in Music. And if you scroll down to general music or click on that topic in the table of contents, here is where you have the kindergarten through 8th grade general music standards. So if you want to reference those and make sure that my drop downs are correct, that's where you find them. So here's a picture of what I call my control center in my classroom. In the last topic, we talked about classroom management. So here are my rules and here are my music letters. And then over here, I have an I can statement and then my vocab section. So some teachers like to edit this in between classes. I don't have time for that, so I just like to do the main vocabulary terms, and then I'll describe the ones for each individual grade level, maybe in that lesson PowerPoint. And then here you see I have a magnet clip. So I had some classes working on musical opposites like Largo and Presto or Pianissimo and Fortissimo. That's what we were working on that week. But then other classes were still working on pitch. So there's actually a second piece of paper behind here, and I just flip it between classes so that if I have different things that different classes are working on, I can just flip that. I've also seen it where different teachers post different grade levels or classes worth of I can statements on a bulletin board. That's a great way to do it too. But I found that this saves space and for me saves time, and I just have it in one spot. So this has been part 1 of instructional planning and how to set up a lesson plan.